Break.
White noise.
White
White
noise is
noise.
what we're talking
Noah
about.
Baumbach, Greta Gerwig, Adam
Danny
Driver, Kelsey
Elfman,
Dean Sound System,
Andre
Don Cheadle,
3000.
and
What
White
noise?
Noise.
What's up, everybody? It is yet another episode of the Movie Time podcast with myself, Rene, LOWKEY GEEK, and Blake the Wolf. What's going on,
What up, what
Blake?
up, what up? Renee, how the hell are you? It's wintertime. We're getting near the end of the year, which means I've gone to the movies 5 times in the last week.
Yeah.
And obviously you can tell just like the hair is getting shocked back. I'm getting paler over time. But
Yeah.
we do it for love of the game, man. I'm excited to talk about this movie in particular.
And I had a feeling you would be. That's why I held myself talking about this movie for a while, because
Thank you.
I wanted to have a conversation with you about it. And if you don't know already what we're going to be talking about, we are going to be talking about Noah Baumbach's latest White Noise that is coming.
White
White Noise.
noise.
That is gonna be released on Netflix at the end of the month. But if you are lucky enough to live in a major metropolitan area, you have a chance to watch it in theaters right now in limited release. I, of course, love to brag that I actually saw this at New York Film
Nope,
Festival.
nope,
This
nope,
was the
nope.
opening night movie of the festival. Basically, all night in all their different theaters, they were screening it. It like at least 3 times each theater that night. I unfortunately wasn't in the main Alice Tully Hall where they actually had the cast and Noah there on stage and all that. But regardless, I got to see the movie pretty early, with a festival crowd, which I think it was 50-50, I would have to say, based off of the reaction that I saw there. But we'll get
50-50
into
what?
their reaction to the movie as a whole.
Oh, like 50, half the people loved it, half the people were more indifferent.
I think they were just very confused.
And 100% of them are the kind of people who brag about going to New York Film Festival on
Totally,
podcasts. Yeah. You talk about New York
1000%.
Film Festival, and
Yes.
all I hear is white noise, my friend.
That's it, white noise. And before we get into our white noise conversation, if you haven't seen us before and you just happen to come across this video, this is the Movie Time podcast where every week Blake and we talk about and bullshit about movies, usually whatever the big movie is of that week. We lucky enough to have seen this movie pretty early before its more global release on Netflix. So we are very, very happy to talk about it. If you like what you see, you want to see more of us or more of any of this type of content, all you got to do is hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, hit that notification bell to get notified every time a new video is uploaded.
Ding, ding, ding,
If
ding.
you are an audio listener, thank you so much for checking us out on podcast format. If you want an audio version of this episode, just type in LOWKEY GEEK on your podcast platform of choice, where you could download this and many other episodes on there. And if it prompts you, leave a nice rating. It really helps with growing the channel and building the community and all that stuff. So let's get into White Noise. And no, again, let me just repeat, this is Noah Baumbach's White Noise, not to be confused with the 2005 film White Noise starring Michael Keaton. Totally different movie, but same title. Yep. Look it up if you don't know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
It's a more of a sci-fi thriller movie, and that involved a lot of radios. But White Noise by Noah Baumbach. Basically, the movie is about, and I'm going to read you a synopsis I got from Google because Google always have the more interesting
hmm
synopsis.
hmm
College professor Jack Gladney and his family's comfortable suburban life is upended when a nearby chemical leak causes the Airborne Toxic Event, releasing a noxious black cloud over the region that forces the Gladney family to evacuate. Now, I feel like that synopsis covers a very small part of the movie, although
Yeah.
albeit a significant part also as well. This was definitely one of those movies that I think a lot of people were not realizing or ready to expect what they were getting themselves into, especially for those who are not too familiar with maybe Noah Baumbach's kind of library of work. I think a lot of people were going into this movie only familiar with Marriage Story, which obviously back
Mm.
in 2019
Hmm. Hmm.
was a huge film with Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson. Very gut wrenching family drama and all that stuff like that. I really enjoyed that movie. So, me not really knowing a lot of Baumbach's films, of course, that was my main reference going into this movie. As we were watching the movie, I think all of us were just like, what is happening? Because the movie, I should start off by saying, is adapted by a popular book by author Don DeLillo. The DeLillo, yeah,
DeLillo, Don DeLillo,
uh, Don DeLillo. And
DeLillo.
based off of some things that I read after I watched the movie, this is a very hard novel to adapt. And I think several people have tried and attempted to do so in the past. But Noah just said, you know what? F it. I'm going to give my shot. I'm going to go into it. And first thing you notice right away is that this is definitely one of Baumbach's biggest productions that he's probably ever worked on. You could tell like the budget was there. He probably had the full backing of Netflix on this to kind of give him all the funds necessary to do a movie like this because he took full advantage of it. You could tell by the special effects, the settings, all that stuff like that. Now, I the movie itself jumps around quite a bit, and it's a very chaotic sense, and that's what I felt watching it. Something I mentioned to Blake earlier, right before we recorded, was that if you are a person who has ADHD, it's either this is going to be a movie that you would either love or really hate, right? Because literally, it goes from being a family drama to one of those like 80s, 90s style apocalyptic action type of movies. Then it goes into a little bit of like crime thriller and all that stuff like that. And then it ends in this crazy supermarket musical montage at the end,
Mhm.
that kind
Mhm.
of very
Mhm.
similar to
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
Grease or something like how it ends, right? So it goes through all of these different genres, and you could see all of Baumbach's probably influences or things that he grew up watching, especially in the 80s and 90s, and he uses that in this movie to kind of adapt this storyline. Um, I wanted to talk to Blake about this because him being a more familiar Noah Baumbach guy, and maybe someone who can really see the intricacies of the movie to help fill in some of the things that I didn't really take in because I felt I just didn't know what I watched. Was I entertained? Yes, I was. But at the end of the day, when I came home and sat and thought about the movie, I was like, "What did I just watch?" I'm trying to like you know dissect it and like go through everything and all that. And it was a very, very interesting movie to say the least. Very interesting storyline, which really in the center core of it really does follow this suburban family and kind of their inner drama and all that. But another thing that I noticed too is that there is a lot of takes about abundance of information and how certain people will take that information, maybe get paranoid about the information that they're reading, or we'll just gloss over it and say, "Oh, that's nonsense. We don't have to worry all about that stuff." And we see a lot of those type of conversations within the family. Perfect setting to have that in the 80s when you have commercials, movies, and all that stuff throwing so much stuff at you at the time and kind of flooding your brains with all of this type of poppy information, lovely images and everything like that. But at the same time, we're in the Reagan era. So there's like the Cold War and all that stuff happening. So there's a lot of stuff going on. The dialogue itself was very academic, very, very intelligent. And like the one thing that threw me off is like the entire family talks in academic speak, which I was just like, I don't know any family who talks like that or converses in that way. Even the kids. The kids were just like, it's almost you're watching like CNN or something like that, like a round table every time they were talking at a dinner table or whatever the case is. Um but the performances as a whole, I thought were very well done. Adam Driver, who has already worked with Baumbach several times, Greta Gerwig, who rarely acts these days. It was nice to see her on screen. Don Cheadle, plays a professor in the same college that Adam teaches at, and I think one of the surprises was Andre 3000, who just kind of showed up like out of nowhere, and I'm like, oh, he's in this movie too. But I think overall, I was entertained, but I still question what in the world did I watch? And even to this day, and the film festival was like already at this point, like 2 months ago. I'm still trying to dissect it all and all that. Um, we can talk about theater experience real quick because I'm sure, Blake, you are interested in hearing what the reaction was. And like I said, it was primarily 50-50 down the line. I heard people loving the movie and really, saying like this was definitely a huge risk and a huge swing from Noah that landed really well with them. And then you had others who were just like me, very confused as to what was going on. Now, when the movie ended and we had that musical montage, I think I was one of the few that were laughing because I guess it was one of those with all this stuff happening to have it end in such like a happy-go-lucky way, with like a choreographed musical number at the end at a supermarket, which I'm sure you'll let me know that the supermarket had a very significant aspect as far as messaging throughout
I
the
hope
movie.
you're not joking because I am absolutely going to get to that later. Yeah.
Yes, and I had a feeling you would, you know, so that's why I'm gonna leave that to you. But it's so funny how it just ends in that type of setting. Again with like the very Grease-like ending and all that. So yeah, I think overall people, like I said, 50-50 down the line. And yeah, I'm sure that they had conversations about this. I'm very curious what people are going to think when this movie lands on Netflix and more eyes are going to be on it. I think when you compare it to Marriage Story, it's a very different type of movie. And I think that's also one of the reasons why we haven't heard about this movie in the conversation of any kind of awards consideration, because I think it was one of those movies that may have split the opinion on Noah's directing or choices he made in this movie, um, compared to a movie that was very to the point and I guess in a lot of people's eyes easier to follow than this movie. So Blake,
Yes.
first I want to know, did you read the book? Are you familiar with the book at all?
So I checked it out of the library at one point, have been
Hmm.
familiar with the book uh, for a while because it's referenced in a Bright Eyes song, and I used to be an obsessive there. Um, I was looking it up, and I remember like college lit classes. Like somebody was saying, it was on two different syllabi of theirs. Like it is a classic American great novel kind of thing that I'm not sure how seriously people take it. We're not going to get into like the merits of the novel, but I have not read it. I've been familiar with the import of the novel
Hmm.
since in all of my adult years. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So that being said, obviously, what was the theater reaction like when you went to see it? Now, I'm sure at this point, not a lot of people are probably watching this movie because it has been out in the theaters for a limited time for a while now. So curious to hear about that, and obviously curious knowing that Noah is one of your favorite directors, and you
Yeah.
have referenced him quite a bit on this podcast. What was your initial take on this? What were you expecting also, like going into this? I think I'm very curious to know about all that.
Yeah, I'll get to my thoughts on it in a second.
Hmm.
But I'm excited to talk about this one. My theater experience is a special one for me where I saw it at Paris Theater
Oh,
in
okay.
Manhattan, one of my favorite movie theaters. It's the same place I saw Marriage Story, because it's the one Netflix bought out and has been operating since November 2019. My understanding, the idea was we need to get our movies for Oscar contention. We can't do that on the streaming platform
Totally.
alone. It has to be in
Yep.
theaters. So,
Hmm.
interestingly enough, I saw it on a Saturday matinee, which I'm guessing the evening show had more people, but there was about 10 people in this pretty big
Yeah.
movie theater. And when I saw Blonde recently, another Netflix movie, it was chock full of people.
Sure.
Maybe the timing, I didn't see it right away, etc. But my other guess is Netflix does not give a damn how many people sit there because they're only doing it to maybe build up some hype and give
Yeah.
East Coast people a chance to see it early, whatever. But other than that, they're just doing it for awards contentions
Yeah.
reasons is my understanding. The audience were people who were like the 10 people in a city of 8 million who go to see that movie on a Saturday, 2 p.m. After it had been out for a second. They seem to be into it. Hard to tell when it's a giant, big, classic
Sure.
New York movie theater. And can't. And I also sat in the balcony with a friend away from everyone. There was no one else in the whole balcony area. It's my favorite place to sit there, front row of the balcony. So then you have this expanse, it's like chasm over you. And it's this very like if you were to show a movie scene of people enjoying a movie in the 1950s with like the red velvet seats and everything, it was
Mhm.
that feeling. My reaction to it, it is my
Well, first
second
let yeah,
favorite. Yeah.
first
What?
let's
Okay.
let's
Yeah.
go
Okay.
go before you went into the movie. What were your
Sure.
expectations like?
So I have been intentionally avoiding spoilers for movies I know I'm going to see. And I used to be more obsessive. I want to read everything about it. And I've learned that I enjoy it more if I go in just totally blank and get rid of that expectations game. I knew enough about it from the content I just come across
Mhm.
that it was going to be a more cinematic movie, that it was an adaptation of Don DeLillo's book that I hadn't read. And then I'd portions of the trailer where it shows Adam Driver's costume. And when I saw that, I just clicked off the trailer. I was like, I know everything I need to know. I will definitely be seeing this movie.
Yeah.
I went over all of the Noah Baumbach movies, and other than some random 1997 movie and a documentary he made, I've seen all the other
Mhm.
movies. And he's been a favorite of mine since college, for sure. I'm gonna try to not geek out too hard, but overall, it's one I knew I was gonna go see this movie as soon as I could,
Mhm.
and I knew it was gonna be cinematic, and that some people were kind of mixed reviews on it. So whatever you said
Okay.
about New York Film Festival, I'd gotten that impression too that it wasn't gonna be for everybody,
Right.
which I found made me more optimistic about it. It being a more cinematic one,
Mhm.
a bigger spectacle for the Noah Baumbach movies, who's done a lot of just indie talky,
Yeah.
just two people in a train, in a car, in an apartment, just talking for a couple hours type movies.
Mhm.
So the idea of him getting a bigger palette to play with, a bigger canvas, and the fact that it's turning some people away, turning people off, I was like, oh, this is probably exactly meant for me. My
Right.
expectations were definitely exceeded. I was worried I would go into it and be bored by
Mhm.
an filmmaker trying to make a bigger movie after getting the most awards recognition he'd had in
Mhm.
his career, to my mind, after Marriage Story, and
Yeah.
getting a bigger check from Netflix for being one of those people who, when we did our Netflix episode, we talked about Noah Baumbach movies and a bunch of directors who get big checks from Netflix and then it flops. He's one of the
Yeah.
few that it's really paid off, at least if they're trying to go awardsy. He gets a bigger check. This might be the biggest check he ever gets.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure it'll ever happen again. I'm curious how the reception is. My hope is this has some real award season legs and that people come around to it and it has more of a little engine that could vibe
Mhm.
and people take it seriously because it's obvious at least they liked his last movie. And sometimes once you get in the door of the academy, people take all
Mhm.
your movies after that more seriously.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious how this one is received. I don't know that it will get a better like audience who's primed for this movie than New York Film Festival where you were. And
Right.
if it's 50-50 there, that's not promising for box office reasons. And if it's viewed and perceived as a flop or a failure, then I'm curious maybe also the Academy might turn its back on the movie, which they do that sometimes too. This might be a year of awarding the big Avatar 2, Top Gun, Wakanda Forever type movies because the industry's been so desperate for box office returns. And when a movie flops, it seems like this might be a bad year for the Academy to take it more seriously. Back in the day, you'd have a movie like Hurt Locker winning Best Picture, even though it didn't make a ton of money early on at the
Mhm.
box office. And now it seems like even a movie like The Whale, people are starting to turn away from just because it doesn't seem like it will be successful, essentially.
Mhm.
Like that's among other reasons. So we'll see. So overall, I had a great time at the theater. I absolutely put myself in this movie. You talked about the ADHD problem where the movie's jumping all over the place. It was at the exact wavelength and frequency that I needed from this movie. So it definitely exceeded my expectations. I had a great time. Went with a buddy and we walked through Central Park afterward, just outside the Paris Theater, talked about it, and they were less hyped about it,
Mhm.
but I definitely was in that mode where I was just kind of like going off about all the things I enjoyed about the movie. Noah Baumbach being one of my all-time favorite screenwriters and directors. He's got more credits as a screenwriter, including some of my favorite Wes Anderson films. But I've seen all Noah Baumbach movies except one from the 90s and one random documentary. This is maybe my favorite of all time. It's a little too soon to
Mhm.
say that, but the other thing I'll say about this movie, I know we can get into some of the themes of the movie overall. It's dealing with the intellectual thing, which you mentioned families don't talk that way. I know that my family, to a degree, talks that way, and there are some people in intellectual world that do. It is rare and it is very literary, but also this movie goes above and beyond on
Yeah.
all of that because it's based off of a Don DeLillo novel, which part of the reason people were saying it was unadaptable is there's whole chunks of the novel that are just talking about ideas. And it
Mhm.
would have been a weird movie if Adam Driver just been narrating on his thoughts on existentialism. And so instead they kind of put that into the dialogue here, which I really enjoyed the
Mhm.
dialogue in this movie. One of my favorite things of any Noah Baumbach film. I come to him for that even more than the directing. The movie deals with academia, capitalism, and consumerism, especially of the Reagan 1980s. It's dealing with fascism and populism. The main things, this movie's announced in 2021. I think a couple reasons why it's a timely film is it deals to some degree with the Trump presidency. Um, and it's also dealing with there's something in the air that's going around that's requiring people to wear face masks. And what's it
Mhm.
like when you're stuck in a location with your family and are scared? And I wouldn't be surprised if Noah Baumbach said, and hey, this is now the time to make the white noise movie. That he
Right.
rereads it and goes, oh, this is perfect. So
Mhm.
overall, happy to break it down further, but it is my second favorite movie of the year as of now, right behind
Wow.
Everything Everywhere All at Once. I'm not sure how it lands on the final rankings. I can't imagine anything surpassing Everything Everywhere.
Mhm.
But also, I then looked at the other movies from this year, and nothing's close to that two spot. So I think my one, two, and maybe my three with Tar are all pretty locked up. But all that to say, I thoroughly enjoyed this movie.
Wow. To say that it's your number 2 movie of the year, that says a lot. But I also do feel like this is a you movie. This is definitely a movie that was really catered for you,
Yep.
especially knowing you for so long. That's one of the reasons why I'm like the frenetic pace of the movie. I knew immediately. I was like, "Oh, Blake is gonna love this," because I know that's how your brain works, right? Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. But before we continue, I wanted to quickly talk about Bulletproof coffee. Bulletproof coffee is my favorite coffee of choice to start off my mornings with. Why? Because it's clean coffee. What does that mean? Well, one, there are no chemicals in it. Why? Because they go through this multi step process of making sure that all of their beans are fully clean and free of any chemicals so that when you get the beans delivered to you, it is the pure beans, the pure coffee, the goodness that you've been wanting, the taste, the flavor, and the nutritional value as well, without worrying about any added chemicals or anything else put into the mix there. It also doesn't have that weird acidic taste that some coffees give you. I don't know how about you, but for me, some coffees kind of give me that weird sensation in my stomach, makes me a little burpy, and it kind of drags me down a little bit instead of really waking me up, which is something that I need from my coffee every day. Bulletproof also offers a lot of keto-friendly snacks and supplements, anything that you need to kind of add to your everyday nutritional needs, add to your diet, pretty much transforms the way you feel every day. So for a limited time, if you use this code that you see on the screen right now, LOWKEY GEEK,
all caps, one word, you can get 15% off your order. So, what is it better than that, right? Check out the link in the description of this episode. Use this code, get yourself your discount, and make your mornings a little bit more bulletproof with Bulletproof Coffee. Now, back to the episode.
But yeah, let's talk about a little bit about the messages and the themes, and maybe you could help shed some light on some of the more abstract, or I don't want to, maybe absurd is the wrong word, but maybe the over um the over dramatizing of certain things and discussions that they had, right? So I think one of the things that really stood out to me was when Adam Driver's character and Don Cheadle's character had a professor off, I guess you could say,
I like
um,
for sure.
which was so intense, and it was a huge chunk of that part of the movie. Like,
Yeah.
I felt like that took a long time. So basically, to give a little bit more insight on Adam Driver's character, he specializes in history, but more along the lines of kind of Germany, Nazi history, especially with Adolf Hitler and all that. Well, and then Don Cheadle was putting together a class that talked about the importance of Elvis, right? And I think it was one of those things where which figure held the most importance in pop culture and history, or something along those lines. And it was basically them, creating arguments, going back and it was like a tennis match, an academic tennis match on all of
Also,
these
Dick
facts
of
and all that.
Zoolander, the breakdance battle or the
Yes.
dance-off scene, but
Yes.
with Professor I viewed it as more collaborative than that, where Don Cheadle invites him to
I
join the
think
class.
yeah, I think at like towards the end, that was more clear. But in the beginning it felt more like well, I know this and this is my guy. You know this is your guy, blah blah blah. But you're right. I think it was at the end became more clear that it was more of these are the reasons why you can compare the two as to their importance in our history and pop culture, and in the eyes of the populace, right?
Right.
So how would you break down that scene, and like basically, like, what significance did that have in the movie and what they were trying to tell overall?
So that scene is a perfect encapsulation of what we're talking about,
Mhm.
where is very intellectually stilted and highly literary dialogue,
Yeah.
but it's also like there's two monologues happening at the same time. And
Mhm.
a lot of times when Greta Gerwig is in dialogue with Adam Driver in this movie, it's more like each character is giving their own monologue and there's
Right.
not a lot of exchange happening there and it's not
Yeah.
very natural. It's very stilted. This is a perfect encapsulation of that. And it's also touching on a couple of the themes we're talking about. So, in a way, it's almost parodying highly
Mhm.
intellectual academic bullshit. There's something existential all throughout the movie, but I do genuinely think the movie is in on the joke and is aware the things that these characters are taking seriously are pretty farcical and
Mhm.
don't really matter at the end of the day. I'm not trying to say that what they're studying doesn't matter, but that these, like, Adam Driver is obsessed with Hitler studies, but he's not really dealing with the emotional impacts of those things. He's excited for the upcoming Hitler conference and is
Right.
almost
Right.
like picking out his outfit for it and like, oh, but that's coming up. I need to borrow a car. And he's more in the minutia of the day to day.
Right.
And Don Cheadle's character is consumed with Elvis Presley and
Mhm.
thinking about the implications of that. Which funny time when Elvis is going to be an awards contender for sure.
Right.
It was
Right.
like fun time for Don Cheadle to just dunk on Elvis for almost every scene he's in this movie.
Yeah.
It's also that's the one of the scenes where if you wanted to make if Noah Baumbach is adapting a book that already existed, but is gets to choose which parts am I going to put in this movie, and if he wanted to make some commentary on Trump, I'm not going to make any big comparisons over Hitler, Elvis, and Donald Trump, but there is something to be said about the fervor
Yeah.
experienced in that moment. This is part of why I think the movie's in on the joke. They're showing scenes of obsessive fans for both Elvis and Hitler in
Mhm.
historical documentary style footage while they're describing what it's like when populism strikes and these people have a crowd frothing at the mouth in excitement
Yeah.
of this figurehead. And the scene ends with the class doing the same for Adam Driver's character.
Totally.
And,
Yeah.
and there's so that's a meta commentary, and that's why I think the movie's in on some of the jokes.
Mhm.
And if someone doesn't get it, they might think that this movie is a big problem or very, full of itself. I actually thought that the movie was kind of taking the piss at times out of the
Mhm.
characters and their self-seriousness. So I enjoyed that quite a bit. And it's a popular thing in like literary criticism now is to deflate people that are in the canon, and why do we, and same as Don Cheadle's doing with the Elvis character, why do we take this person so seriously? And he's kind of claiming it's good that Elvis died young, similar to like a JFK style, then they get to be immortalized.
Yeah.
Well, that was actually a good thing for the legacy of Elvis. um, this movie is part of, it is a 2022 movie adapting a 1985 novel, and I think to some degree, at least, it's taking the piss out of the novel, or at least the characters in it.
Mhm.
Um, Other than that, the main themes, which obviously there's the whole apocalypse of the movie, which that is one of the things where my expectations were thrown. I did know that there would be some of that going on, the toxic airborne event just being in the synopsis of the movie.
Yeah.
I thought that would be the culmination of the movie. This would be mainly we're fighting off, we're in a zombie survival movie, road trip, we need to survive and stay alive movie.
Mhm.
That's not the climax of the movie.
No.
That's not where the movie ends. That's in the middle of the movie, which I think is also saying something. Uh, I definitely am going to watch this one a few more times, and maybe around award season. Hopefully, we'll have a chance to talk about it some more then. Yeah, those are at least a couple of the big themes from this movie,
Yeah.
which
No, it was it
have
it
a
wa
lot of
it was yeah, it was really interesting too because I think when the whole toxic event thing happened, it did throw me off too because you spend the first act of the movie really enthralled in not just the family but the academics of it all. Like especially I think it's safe to say the first act of the movie ends with that Hitler Elvis discussion debate, sound off, professor off, whatever you want to call it. Um, and then it jumps into this dramatic, action sequence, whatever, that's very similar to like a Spielberg Close Encounters or whatever the case is, where everyone now is like running away and, trying to flee for their lives while this big thing happened and all that. But just to touch a little bit on the Don Cheadle character too, and how he kind of views things very differently. The movie starts off with him showing a car crash or scenes of car crashes to his students and how he's trying to romanticize it in a way, right? Where it's just like, oh, this is a very beautiful moment and this and that, but for something that is tragic in many people's lives, and he's spinning it and kind of romanticizing about it and all that. So it is very interesting how that kind of translated into his Elvis discussion, or especially when you go up against a figure like Hitler and all that stuff. Um, but yeah, the toxic airborne thing happened pretty much in Act Two, which was like very very interesting. And I guess in a way you could kind of say like was his like little nod to the whole pandemic and how things, how people react to those type of events, how it changes the dynamics within a family or within a community or whatever the case is. And we saw a lot of that where people were going nuts, like, well, it starts off at more of like a communal thing where, hey, everyone hang out here, we're all going to keep each other safe. And then when shit literally hits the fan, everyone's out for themselves and everyone's going nuts and no one's watching out for anybody, and now it becomes survivor of the fittest, right? Which was really fascinating. But yeah, this movie also does go into a lot of the consumerisms. One of the things I brought up earlier was the supermarket. One thing I also noticed throughout the movie is that since this does take place in the 80s, you'll see TVs in the background with all of these commercials of like New Coke or whatever the case is, really throwing like these products at you. And if you pay attention to the supermarket, there's a lot of conversations about specific types of food or brands. And then you have one aisle that is all strictly generic, where it's just like white packaging with black letters on them and all that. And there's like the debate on, as to who leans towards what or whatever the case is, right? So what was your like more take on the whole consumerism aspect or messaging that was kind of portrayed through in this movie?
Yeah, there's another version of this movie where it's not as based on the pandemic, and it's more
Mhm.
based on environment, which we're seeing a slow leak of a semi that has toxic gases and fumes, and they're talking about all of that and the fear there. And that environmentalism is directly linked to consumerism. So if this had
Yep.
been a few years ago, this might be one of those movies where, which a lot of movies now are talking about environmentalism. It's so in the air, literally, and in the water.
Hey.
Thank you. But then it's almost like people can't help themselves. And even a movie that's not about that, it can be read that way. So
Yeah.
I think this movie's have a much deeper take other than this movie's set in the 1980s in Reagan era. It's actually the book, it seems, is vague when it's set, just late 20th century. This one's 1984 is the movie.
Mhm.
And we're talking about Reagan either is about to win won the second election by a landslide. Um, that is a theme of a lot of 1980s content. Consumer, and then there's something to be said about when you're looking back at that era and then where we are now, and things were very optimistic, and every family can have two cars and
Right.
two, are all just printing money, and that American dream, which turns out was a bit more of a House of Cards
Mhm.
and or just a Potemkin Village illusion. So now we're looking at it with the cynicism of 2022
Right.
and getting to make connections of like, oh right, the mega consumerism of that era has real consequences. So I don't know that the movie is it's I don't think it's too overtly trying to link those things, but I think those concepts are both very heavily in the movie. I'm curious because I now I'm actually like I was literally looking at the library like when is White Noise going to be available at my local New York Public Library. I want
Mhm.
to read it and get more on that, but that to me is very surface level. These things are directly linked to each other.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Um then when we proceed to the third act of the film, that's when it starts becoming more of like a crime thriller, whatever the case is.
We get a little more
Um
story stuff going on in there for sure.
yeah, yeah, it's very interesting because we learn to find out that Greta Gerwig's character, who is Adam Driver's wife, is somewhat addicted to medication, as a certain type of medication that causes a rift within their marriage and the family and all that. Then they start to find out that she's getting these drugs from like a black market source, and the source is holding her hostage at one point, and Adam Driver becomes now the guy who's supposed to save her and become this big hero. Tracking where this is being taken place, ends up killing the guy, right? And it becomes this whole like, well, what are we gonna do with the body situation? And it's so absurd in many different ways. But again, it throws the viewer into another direction that maybe you weren't expecting. What was your take on how it kind of shift tones so dramatically in that way? And was there a specific thing they were trying to portray during those moments?
I do not know. I only know that I loved it and that with my ADHD brain was like perfect. I never want to spend too much time stuck in a car on a road
Yeah.
trip with a family, especially if there's bickering going on or the person in the passenger seat is uber depressed. There's the movie does a good job of jumping around, and so they're stuck in the car underneath the toxic airborne event. Then they have to get gasoline. There's a very bonkers car crash,
Hmm.
throwing back to the Don Cheadle, the opening monologue.
Yep.
There's a chase scene in the middle of it where they're going through
Yep.
they're then stuck in the river, for a bit with their car. This even when it's stuck in the evacuation route, it's still jumping all over the place.
Hmm.
Then the movie does a similar thing in the whole plot. So now it's I don't know how much long after, but it's essentially like, oh wow, that was weird. A character is losing their mind. Like, doesn't anybody care that
Right.
this has happened to us? Then they pretty quickly move on, and there's this new normal concept that they're dealing with. and then going on about their lives, and there's other things that consume them. There is an aspect, and this is, I think, I'll do it now. The big theory of the movie, which maybe it's obvious or not obvious in the book,
Mhm.
maybe on the rewatch I'll think this is dumb as hell. But on the first viewing of the movie, Adam Driver's character is exposed to the toxic airborne event, at least long enough to concern people,
Yeah.
and has this big fear. Oh, I might be dying because of that. He then starts going to the doctor regularly, is lying to the doctor about the amount of exposure.
Hmm.
It's possible Adam Driver's character died between Acts 2 and Acts 3.
Interesting.
It is very possible that Adam Driver's character dies when getting shot, and that the grocery store dance sequence is the purgatory, which is mentioned much earlier in the movie by Don Cheadle about what the grocery store is and its place in our lives is this like liminal space. And at some point, a character is saying, "Are you ready to go through the sliding doors?" And there's something like magical. And Don Cheadle does a beautiful monologue about this place has all of the colors and all of the smells, and underneath these
Right.
white phosphorescent lights, like there's a version of this movie where Adam Driver has died. There's an interpretation where Adam Driver's character has died, and the things that happen after that are more dreamy. The fact that we'll skip over the sicko bizarro hotel room scene,
Yeah. Hmm.
at least for now. But that's a very bizarre circumstance he's in. Then he and Greta Gerwig kind of get shot. He gets kind of shot. Greta Gerwig gets shot. There's a man who's dying, thought he's dead, he's not dead, who had been Greta Gerwig's tormentor, giving her the
Right.
black market drugs. In a creepy hotel room, he's watching TV, and this man's out of his mind off the meds that he created, mad scientist style. Fascinating place to be. Glad they didn't spend too much time there. Love it when a movie jumps around in a place like that. It then goes to run off to the emergency room. It is a neon cross.
Hmm.
It's a German language emergency room with German nuns
Right.
who mostly speak German, but some English. And at some point, they're asking to be comforted by the nuns. And the nuns are saying, "We will not comfort you and tell you that there's a better place in heaven." They're like, "You don't believe in heaven?" And the nun goes on another. This movie is
Yep.
great at long, highly literary monologues. The nun does a whole thing about, "How dare you ask me to comfort you? We believe in these things so that the world doesn't fall apart, but I don't personally believe in this bullshit
Right.
at all." It's a very surreal experience
Uh huh.
to have neon sign, church turned into emergency room, with them like they open a drawer and they throw the gun in there, and it's just all these weapons that people have had to like confiscate when they're coming into the emergency room. There's a lot of absurd and surreal dialogue throughout the movie, but this is maybe the peak of the surrealism. So it's
Yeah.
possible none of this is really happening necessarily, and that's always one of my favorite things to do in any movie. Like, it's possible Top Gun Maverick was all just a big afterlife
It
dream.
was all a dream.
I love that opinion of Top Gun Maverick. This one, it feels even more real because the man's not only been shot, but he's also been exposed to the toxic airborne event.
Right.
There's also a drug that Greta Gerwig's character is taking, where you have memory lapses, but also the things you see, and if someone tells you words, so if someone says bullets are flying at you, they would then believe that bullets are flying at them because of where it hits the imagination part of their brain or whatever.
Hmm.
The toxic airborne event is said to induce deja vu at some point during the movie because it hits on they didn't call it the imagination part of the brain, but like the false memories, false perception part of your brain. So now we have Greta Gerwig character and Adam Driver's character who are both subject to possible mental and memory lapses. I don't know what to believe after after that's established. I love it and I eat that up. But if someone wants to take this movie at face value as being full of itself and taking itself too seriously, and I that's to me at least the wrong foot to
Yeah.
start on when interpreting this movie and what it's about. I don't know what else you want to talk about on the plot, if
I
anything, or if you just want to talk about that sweet grocery store scene, because I could
yeah.
talk about this movie all day.
Yeah, we could talk about that, but I think one of the things you said, it hit you hit it right on the head. Surreal. A lot of things in this movie was very surreal, and I think one of the things that made it fascinating and somewhat entertaining for me was that, plus the parodying of so many things in real life. You know, like you said, a lot of things were like a little bit over the top. You know, the way the family dynamic was, the way like, people view academia, the way people ingest information, the way people react to certain situations and all that. Now, if the theory that you just explained is accurate, basically you're telling me that we just watched all seasons of Lost in one movie, and
Yep.
basically you had like an event that pretty much could have killed, a person or multiple people, and now we're just seeing their life live out in this dreamscape limbo-ish kind of existence, which also explained why there was such a big jump in tone in the third act and all
Right.
that, right?
Also, it's possible based on the long-term consequences of a toxic airborne event I was recently
Uh,
exposed to, that we were all kind of exposed to. It's possible this conversation isn't even happening and we're
oh,
not on YouTube right now because it doesn't make
no.
sense that that would be the case either.
Yeah, no, we're totally. I'm like talking to an ant at this point. Like you're talking to a glass of water,
Uh-huh.
and we think this is going on the internet somewhere, but it's really just aliens are watching this as we're losing our minds and all that, and they're laughing at us right now, and they're probably surpassing this planet because our resources have been tainted by
I'm like,
humans.
I might be a brain in a jar. I might be a character in the book
Yeah,
White Noise by Don DeLillo. I have no idea.
100%. Yeah, but yeah. So to cap the movie, it ends like I said. The best way I could describe it is like an 80s like movie with like one of those musical montages, very similar and akin to like Grease, how that all ended, where you have this big choreographed dance number where they were able to get LCD sound system to reunite to do the ending song in this movie. And it takes place, as you've mentioned, in the supermarket that could be looked upon as purgatory or whatever the case is. And that's basically how the movie ends. And it's a really long choreographed dance musical number, which again, crazy and surreal,
Mhm.
but that was pretty much what you got throughout the whole movie. So in essence, it was a perfect ending for a movie like this. How did you take it when you started seeing that number start to play out?
I was elated by everything that happened there. I had enjoyed the movie so much. It's even hard for me to talk about the movie on this. I told you
Mhm.
beforehand where I was sitting on the
Yeah.
edge of my seat and letting it wash over me and not taking notes and just soaking it in. I really had a great time at the theater. And then it ends with a classic indie band original
Mhm.
song, including absurd dance sequences with Andre 3000
Yeah.
doing a little shaking number, lifting a box
Doing
of
his little shimmy.
cookies.
Yeah.
Amazing.
In
I
the
could have not.
generic aisle too. It was the
Yes,
generic aisle, yeah.
that's all I've ever wanted in this life whatsoever. It reminds you mentioned Greece. It also reminds me of La La Land, where it's a current setting of that old Hollywood style music numbers,
Mhm.
where it's just like, why are these people dancing in the grocery store out of nowhere?
Yeah.
It also evokes to me. I have the movie poster for Jack Demmy's Umbrellas of Cherbourg on my wall. It evokes that. I have from the Paris theater. Shout out to Netflix for the sweet, sweet giveaway.
Yes. That's
A little
awesome.
merch spotlight moment of the white noise. It has the movie name and Noah Baumbach's name on it, but it's a reference to the grocery store scene. I was so proud to walk away with that bit of merch after that sequence. It's an
Mhm.
almost 7.5 minute song. And if I'm looking at the lyrics and trying to do some interpretation, it definitely helps with the purgatory theme. But it's definitely saying um, the I need a new body. I need a new body. I need a bit of shape and tone.
Mhm.
We're not going to do a deep dive in the lyrics. I think this
No.
is open to interpretation enough that you could take it at face value, or you could say there's something deeper, and we could talk about it at the diner after seeing the movie for 2 hours.
Mhm.
Definitely, if you're going to go, I would take the friend who is into this weird crap like me. I think you would have enjoyed it a lot more if we'd just been able to have that long walk.
Totally. Totally.
Um,
Which honestly, if you remember, I had an extra
nope,
ticket
nope,
that
nope. I
night.
can't do this. Nope, nope.
Oh yeah, I wanted to bring this up. I had an extra ticket, but you already had plans that night. So
This is
you
my
could have
fault.
been with me
My
opening night of New York Film Festival watching Noah Baumbach's White Noise. But say la
thanks for
vie.
reminding me of that. The retro FOMO feels so good. I really appreciate it, man. Thank you. Let me go. I don't want to talk about why. Um, I always want. Okay, there's people who are into movie musicals and there's people who hate it.
Yeah.
They go, it doesn't make sense why everyone danced out of nowhere and they all knew the words and it's so dumb. I love that shit. I love escapism. I love highly cinematic things. I couldn't have asked for a better ending this movie. I kind of hope the LCD Sound System gets nominated for original song. That's in the
They
cards.
could. They could.
They've been
Yeah.
doing a long run in Brooklyn of concerts now that they are
Mhm.
back together. I can't. I was gleaming. I was beaming. I was so excited. I actually thought about dancing in the theater because that is a style of dance that I really enjoy. Just absurd, repetitive movements.
Yep. Mhm.
Very fun moment. Yeah, I'm essentially speechless about it. I'm glad that we were able to fill up this much time because I need to watch it a good handful, few more times.
I have to say, now hearing that theory, it makes me now want to rewatch it with that in mind now and watching the events as they unfold because I could now walk away thinking very differently about this movie than I did originally. Because again, what I like to do, especially a movie in a festival setting, I try not to read up anything about it.
Yeah.
You know, I just, oh, that's the director. Oh, that's who's in the movie. Okay, you already piqued my interest. I'm gonna check it out.
Yep.
And then I watch it very fresh. I don't watch the trailers and all that stuff. And most of the time, movies at festivals don't even have trailers, right? Maybe because this is the first time you're getting exposed to said movie or whatever the case is. So going into this movie so clean and so fresh and not knowing much of anything, of course I'm going to be taken back at certain things, and it takes me maybe a little longer to process a lot of stuff. I mean, you already know we talked about my reaction to Bones and All when I walked into that movie, not really realizing what the theme was in there at all. So now seeing the movie, having a chance to talk to you about it, hearing that theory, now I kind of want to rewatch it with all of that in mind and see how I'm going to react to this movie now. Because I think a good amount of time had definitely passed since I saw it that I could, in essence, kind of come into it somewhat fresh and not, not tainted in my thought and judgment of the movie as a whole or whatever the case is. I think it's also good to mention that Danny Elfman did the score of this movie,
Yeah.
which was so fitting, especially during the action scenes and all that, during the second act and bleeding into the third act and all that. So, if we're going to be talking about soundtracks and all that, there is another possibility that Danny Elfman could be considered for this movie, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, anytime Danny Elfman's name shows up in the credits, I go, all right, this should be good. I think the last thing I would say is if you're the kind of person who is terrified of the word existentialism, and if a movie is talking about those kinds of things, don't see this movie necessarily, or you might just go into it knowing you might not enjoy it. But if you are that person, I would still say enjoy this movie as a satire and as
Mhm.
a send up of that stuff. Um, I don't know. I don't know who this movie is for, other than I know that he just said, "Okay, what movie would Blake Wolf want to see in
Yeah,
2022?" And then wrote a movie perfectly scripted accordingly. I'm curious what the reception is like after this, but I, for one, it worked on me.
nice. Well, and again, I had a feeling it would after seeing it, and I think again, I actually did try to formulate a single video review, and I recorded it 3 times changing the dialogue multiple times. And I said, you know what? Let me just wait for Blake to watch it, and then we could just do one of these episodes so that we could actually fully talk about it. Truth. This is the truth. I have all the video files to prove it.
I want you to
So
send those to me just so I don't post them. Do not. But I
yeah,
want you to send me
no, I'll
links.
just share it to you. Just see my take and take. I was like, oh no, this is not working out. What the hell am I talking about?
The intersection of cars and I don't know what the fuck was that. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it is true. It is very hard to describe this movie to someone who is not into those type of movies or just into that type of I don't know. I don't even know how to say it, but to recommend this movie would be extremely difficult, right? Unless you are like us or whatever the case is, or if you are very open to different types of storytelling. I think you'll definitely take something away from this or get a kick at certain aspects. Um, who this movie is for, again, it's very hard to say. But if you were to describe, like, attach keywords to describe this type of movie, I mean, parody, satirical, consumerism. What else would you add in there?
Literary existentialism
Yes,
is to me one of the
yes,
biggest ones, which I know we talked. I'm not going to get deep into it. We talked about the possibility that Adam Driver's character died. There's
right,
moments where there's an interpretation of a lot of the dialogue that references something Don Cheadle was saying earlier, that all
right.
plots are plots towards death, and that
Right.
the toxic airborne event, the drugs that are happening, the psychic death happening in the characters, the people getting shot, and the grocery store. It could just be a whole thing about the meaning of life, death,
Hmm.
family, what our purpose is here, etc. And just an angst, someone working through their angst of that issue
Right.
in a post-pandemic society. Um, sorry, the movie's set pre-pandemic, but the director and the screenwriting and all that is just like working that issue out. A lot of us had a little too much time to just sit and ponder.
Oh yeah,
What are we doing?
yeah.
Uh,
No, for sure.
my, my concern on I'm realizing now, what happens with some of these movies, they go on Netflix and people go, oh, Marriage Story, I like that. Let me put this
Yeah.
on. Adam Driver, I love Star Wars. Let me put this
Yep.
on. Oh, interesting. A Stranger Things style 80s
Hmm.
apocalypse type Spielberg movie. Oh, for sure, I'm gonna put that on. And they're just gonna go, what the fuck was that?
Exactly.
It
Yeah.
has, to me, it has more in common with Annette than anything that somebody would like. The bizarre Adam Driver movie,
Yeah.
musical from last year,
Hmm.
which is another one that had some musical sequences that were so out of this world. Surreal, modern times, though. I think that this will have a lot. This might be one of those where the audience favorability ratings will be very low,
Yeah.
but the people who are in on it, the coastal elites, the critics, etc., they might like it more. So I'm sure. I have a feeling we'll see, but I have a feeling we'll talk about this one more in the coming months as we do awards stuff.
I would hope so because it definitely does lend to good conversations, especially like of the films that came out of this year. It definitely in a lot of ways it does stand out. It really does because
Yeah.
it is in a lack of a better term, it was very bizarre, but that could be interpreted as a good thing or for some it's a bad thing. Looking at some of the ratings that I see online, Rotten Tomatoes has it at 63%. Letterbox, your platform of choice, has it at a 3.3 out of 5 as an average
Oh,
score.
that's bad.
Yeah,
Letterboxd?
IMDb has it as
Wow.
6.5, and Google users rate it 70% like this movie. But again, it hasn't been fully released globally yet. So this is just
My
a
feeling is that
handful of
those numbers
people.
go down once the average person sees it on
Yeah,
accident. Because like the
yeah.
Letterboxd Film Bros are, I count myself among them.
Hmm.
It's kind of a movie for that person. Wow. Okay. So
Yeah.
I'm glad I got all my thoughts on white noise out today, because I'm not sure how much we'll be talking about it in the future.
Yeah. But
Mm.
who knows? Maybe this conversation helped us formulate some sort of an opinion for those of you who either have watched it or are curious in watching it. I don't think we gave a lot of stuff away, but this is the type of movie that you could actually hear two people talking about intricacies of the plot and what happened in the movie, and you could still watch this movie and still have it very freshly told to you while you view it because we didn't cover a lot of the other stuff that happened throughout this movie. So definitely curious as to what all of you think about this. Is this a movie you are planning to watch? Is this a movie you happen to already watch? All your thoughts, comments, feelings about the movie. We would love to hear it. We would love to hear your discussion. Are you familiar with Noah Baumbach's, line of work? Did you like Marriage Story? I don't know if we should even bring that up because this is a totally different movie than that. But let us know in the comments. I think to close things off, and we talked about Letterboxd, hearing what the average rating was, what was your rating for this movie?
5 out of 5, and it immediately went onto my top 150 movies of all time list.
Wow.
I'm thinking it might be this is too early. It might be a top 30 movies all time for me, like for real.
Amazing.
Yeah, I
Okay.
really liked this one, and the fact that other people don't like it actually makes me like it.
Yeah, there's something.
And
Yeah.
let me in the comments and let me know why I'm wrong. And you know what? It'll just inspire my passion for this movie. I'll be so excited about it. I
Nice.
don't Blu-ray. I
Nice.
don't even have a Blu-ray player.
That's amazing. But again, I'm not surprised because this movie does scream you. It's like a perfect movie for you. But that all being said and out of the way, that has been our episode of Movie Time. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining us on this conversation of white noise. Before we head out, white noise. Dun, 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 dun. Before we end the episode, Blake, where can they find you online?
Letterbox.com. And my username is Blake Wolf SSN. That's BLAKEWOLFSSN.
Nice, very nice. And as for me, obviously, you could see all the handles on the screen: LOWKEY GEEK, Instagram, Twitter. More importantly, Facebook. Not Facebook, YouTube. Who goes on Facebook anymore? But YouTube. Again, if you haven't done so already, it takes you a couple seconds. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't done so already. Notification bell to get notified of all future uploads. Audio listeners, thank you so much for listening. If you want an audio version, LOWKEY GEEK, podcast platform of choice. Download this, leave an excellent rating. All that, again, out of the way. This has been Movie Time. I've been Rene. That's been Blake. Thank you so much. Stay cool, stay classy, stay sane. We'll catch you in the next one. Peace out, y'all.
White noise.